Welcome everyone here today at Meet the Blockchain VC webinar hosted by Crypto Valley Association in Zug. We are quite a big association and we're very happy to having you here. I think the crypto industry here in Zug is becoming more and more important even during not so easy times. I think it's very interesting that Zug was now elected by Consensus Magazine the most important hub for crypto companies and crypto ventures. I'm very happy now to welcome Andi Pitt from Ego Death VC Capital to have you with here, and I'm also very happy to welcome Demelza from Cointelegraph in participating in this webinar. Maybe I think I prefer to let Andi Pitt introduce herself. Maybe Demelza, you had also a few words to welcome our participants.
Sure. Well, I'll go ahead and let Andi introduce herself, and then I'll say a few words for the participants.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Andi Pitt. I'm a founding partner at Ego Death Capital. So we're a venture capital fund based in the US, investing in companies that are building in the Bitcoin ecosystem, but investing in companies all around the world.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for hosting me. It's great to be here and to speak to your members.
May I just quickly ask one question before you, Demelza, because I think it's a very interesting name, the Ego Death Capital. Maybe can you quickly explain us a bit why and how it came that you've chosen this name?
Yeah, so we were doing a lot of thinking around what we wanted to name the fund. We wanted to do something a little different, something that would be really kind of recognizable and interesting. And we were thinking about what Bitcoin represents and this sort of transition to a new system and kind of releasing the one way of seeing the world and kind of this change. And this concept of ego death came through in it's a sort of a concept in meditation or a spiritual practice of releasing the habitual, the patterned, the conditioned ways you have of seeing the world, and being able to release that to see reality and to see things as they truly are. And we felt that was kind of representative of Bitcoin, of releasing kind of like the old way of doing things and seeing this kind of much better way. And there's so many also, we sort of keep learning new things. It also represents a lot around how we approach from a values perspective, how we operate as a team, how we approach things in general. It's not about an individual. It's really about remaining open-minded. I think the creation of Bitcoin by Satoshi was kind of this ultimate act of ego death, that he created it and then left and, didn't take any credit for it. So there's sort of been many layers which ego death kind of works as a Bitcoin VC.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, thanks a lot for that. I wanted to just say a brief introduction to the Meet the Blockchain VC panel. So basically we have these calls quarterly. And we invite esteemed VCs in the space like Andi Pitt to join us. And in addition to the quarterly Meet the Blockchain VC panel discussions that we have for the investor working group at the CVA, we've also now made a Telegram channel for everyone so that we can keep this discussion going in between these panel discussions. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that Telegram channel in the chat so that anyone can join us. And then also, I just wanted to introduce myself as well. Everybody knows me because I am co-chair with Martin, but I'm the director of research at Cointelegraph, and I'm also managing the Bitcoin-only active strategy for Zeltner & Co. based in Zurich.
Thank you. Perfect. So I'll just jump directly into our question. We have prepared a questionnaire. As many of our listeners know, it's always kind of the same question, so that we can really compare how our VCs, the VCs we're hosting here, how they differentiate between them. And now maybe first question to Andi, why do you invest in blockchain and where do you see its biggest potential?
So we invest, as I sort of said, only in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is being, we can go into that, I guess, a little bit later. The biggest potential is really creating a new global financial system that's decentralized, that's democratic, that's open to anyone, and really replacing this old system, which is very segregated, which is very kind of country specific, very much controlled and centralized by large organizations, by governments. And so really building this whole new system from the ground up for kind of everyone in the world to be a part of is how we see it.
Mm-hmm. And now you told me you're not only investing into Bitcoin, you're not just a Bitcoin whale. I mean, that's my question. Do you invest in new protocols, in blockchain infrastructure projects, in applications?
So we don't invest in Bitcoin directly. We only invest in companies that are building technology for the Bitcoin ecosystem. So that's a little different so we don't invest in any tokens or new protocols or anything like that. We're investing in companies that are very much kind of look much more like traditional Delaware C Corp technology corporations. So they might be more analogous to companies like a PayPal in the traditional financial ecosystem, or it might be a company that's using the new Bitcoin rails, Bitcoin and Lightning rails for a specific use case. So we do think that potentially in the future, some companies may IPO via a kind of maybe a Bitcoin, a tokenized method. But really at the moment, we're focused on companies that are building much more kind of real world application type companies.
I mean, let's say in the recent or in the last year, we had kind of a roller coaster also with Bitcoin, and we had lots of challenges also. You raised your fund, you started, I think, in September of last year. So maybe if you could explain us a bit, did you refine your investment and diligence process since you've started, or maybe also even previously that you've started?
Yeah, so we've always had a very, very diligent process. So I spent nearly 8 years at Goldman Sachs. Just a little bit on my background, I guess, as well as the fund. I started my career in mergers and acquisitions, moved across to leverage finance, and then moved across to New York. So I was in Australia, moved across to New York and sat on the trading floor in a principal investing role there. We had kind of a mini fund in a way on the floor. We were always kind of identifying, designing, and then taking principal positions in very large structured credit transactions, both on the funding side and the deployment side. So got a lot of experience taking very, very large transactions, principal transactions through the Goldman Sachs capital committees. So you can imagine, you know, if you're taking a multi-billion-dollar principal position through full capital committee, it's a very, very diligent process and a very, very structured process. So a lot of the process on that I've brought across into the fund. Obviously, it's a very, very different way of thinking. It's much more upside focused, but in terms of the process, the level of diligence, the way that we run transactions, I've brought that across. So certainly, I think the collapse of FTX has made us particularly diligent around anything that's kind of an exchange, anything that's holding custody. We're actually doing a diligence process on a company that is effectively custodying assets right now. And it's really like an order. We do have a huge amount of extra diligence for anything like that, and really hold any company that is custodying users' funds to a very, very, very high bar. Because it's maybe even if they're not required to by a regulatory perspective, we would hold them to the higher bar as though they were being regulated by, say, like a US regulator.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Maybe one last additional question regarding to now your background. I think you're not the only one from Goldman Sachs alumni in your company, or are you?
I'm the only one from Goldman Sachs in Death Capital. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot for kind of the introduction on your background, and then kind of your the way that you do due diligence. And I guess you kind of already touched on this a little bit, but kind of the Bitcoin versus Ethereum, or other coins. So do you see the world more as a Bitcoin world, Bitcoin centric, or Ethereum centric, or what? How do you see those two assets in the future?
So we do definitely as a team see that Bitcoin is really the only truly decentralized and truly secure cryptocurrency. And so as we think about an entire system being built on top of a cryptocurrency, we really want that to be built on top of something that's secure and decentralized. And why does decentralization matter? Well, if you don't have something that's decentralized, it's basically reflecting the old system and will be co-opted. If something is decentralized, it prevents manipulation and prevents things being kind of co-opted by a certain person or organization for their own outcomes. And that's the whole point of decentralization. So while there's been a huge amount of experimentation, innovation on Ethereum and other ecosystems, and we really, as a team, look at what's going on in the other ecosystems, and there's so many amazing builders and entrepreneurs and projects. But really, from a long term, we do as a team have this thesis that everything will be on Bitcoin. Now, historically, that of course couldn't happen. So historically, as I'm sure you all know, there's this cryptocurrency trilemma, the trade-offs. You can only have trade-offs between decentralization, security, and scalability. So originally, Ethereum was very much decentralized and prioritizing that. And over time, there was this pressure to increase scalability at the base layer, which led to, and also these kind of environmental concerns, whether they're real or not, we can go into that. And that led to this kind of shift to proof of stake. And if you look at how proof of stake works, it's extremely centralizing. It looks a lot more like the existing financial system of having kind of basically 3 key delegated nodes that everyone is delegating to. You're placing a huge amount of trust in those delegated nodes. And so that does make it challenging from a long-term perspective for Ethereum to actually remain decentralized and to actually have the whole point of having a blockchain in the first place, which is decentralization. And so that's why we really, and we're at this inflection point in Bitcoin, which was really the thesis around starting the fund, that now you can actually build things on Bitcoin. So what we've developed, not me personally, what people in Bitcoin have developed is scaling for Bitcoin that sits at the layer 2 level. So keeping the decentralization and security of that base layer, like that's what you want, this really solid base layer that's hardened over time, been tested and tried. And now you have scalability and functionality at layer 2 level, really predominantly through the Lightning Network. And now that you have scalability, it's just kind of coming to maturity now with scalability and functionality at Lightning. Now you can build these kind of really interesting scalable businesses on top of Bitcoin, really for the first time. And that was very much the thesis of the fund, that there would be this wave of companies building on Bitcoin, and we wanted to kind of really be the leading fund investing in and supporting those companies.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So you kind of touched there on a little bit of proof of stake versus proof of work. And earlier you mentioned that you're not investing in tokens. So I was curious, kind of there's a debate right now, will Bitcoin be able to take some of the DeFi away from Ethereum? And we saw, like, over the last 4 or 5 years, we saw a lot of other coins pop up and say, okay, they're an Ethereum killer. They're going to get DEXs and they're going to get all these tokens on top of them. And so a lot of coins saw these like kind of huge pumps and then huge, let's say, dumps. But if Bitcoin was able to take some of that, DeFi activity over, do you think that, like, what are your thoughts on things like stacks that have a token, or like versus RGB? Like, how do you feel about these different, approaches to building on top of Bitcoin?
Yeah, so there's, I guess, 4 key scaling solutions that sit on top of Bitcoin. There are slightly more, but there's Lightning, which I mentioned. There's also Liquid, which is a side chain, which is run by Blockstream. Stacks is another one. RGB is another one. We do think that there will be a shift of DeFi, and particularly, I think, things like NFT activity across onto Bitcoin, and we're already seeing that. So Stacks, hasn't managed to get a lot of traction so far. There's been a lot of building, but in terms of actual users and traction, it's not really getting there. And how we see the world going is really a shift from tokens and sidechains to basically you can just do that all on the Bitcoin main chain or on Lightning, which Lightning itself is also decentralized. So we're just starting to see that now, which is very interesting. But for instance, you can already, I'm sure you've all come across the huge blow up in ordinals, for instance, that you can inscribe NFTs directly onto Bitcoin. There's also Taproot assets coming out by Lightning to be able to do NFTs and tokens on top of Bitcoin, on top of Lightning, so in a more scalable way. We're already seeing people talking about using BRC20 and ordinals and Taproot assets to build things like DEXs and exchanges. Now, whether we would invest in those is a different question. We're really looking for teams that are building products that really, I guess, contribute in a really positive way. So some of the sort of maybe trading of tokens, we're really looking for teams that are building something really of value, like real world use case value for society, for humanity. And I'm not sure personally that some of the kind of activity around DeFi is necessarily being constructive. There's been a lot of money made and money lost. But we really focus on what's building a real world, like a product that has real world utility today, that we can see really having real world utility and building this something scalable in the next 10 to 15 years.
That's interesting, but maybe could you give us also some concrete examples?
Yeah, I mean, if I just look at something like Solana, for instance, I think Solana had a really interesting promise. Well, you have Solana, and then you have, all of the different cryptocurrencies. And then you have, even if we just take the example of Luna, and then you had people, it was like this really exciting thing. And I had a friend came to me in 2021, like you can stake one of these cryptocurrencies and you get like a 20% return. And then you can like put them into a liquidity pool and liquidity farm. And I was doing all of this. I mean, like we all got into it. But at the end of the day, all it is like gambling and Ponzi schemes with some potential use case at the end. I mean, Solana like potentially had this use case, but really once you got into like liquidity farming and staking and investing and 300%, returns on liquidity, it just lost all sense of a real world utility. And it all kind of worked well while there was this excitement and buzz, but was very much like kind of the tulip mania on steroids, if I can call it that. And so while that's interesting, and we love some of the tech that's being created by it, and we love the innovation and this sense of excitement and creativity that really a lot of crypto has done, and I love that personally. Us as a fund, we're really looking for things that have this more kind of sustainable long-term model, I guess.
Maybe, I mean, just now what you explained, but what is now? I mean, you told us you're Bitcoin centric, I would say, and application on it. What's your thought about a multi-chain world? Do you think will there be a multi-chain world, or will everything be built finally or eventually on the Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum network?
Yeah, I'm really open-minded. I think historically, a lot of the reasons people have built on new chains is because they could get financial support for building on those chains because of the initial coin offerings. Well, not an ICO anymore, token offerings that were done. And so there was this financial incentive for founders to build on different chains. I think really what the last year has shown is there's a huge amount of fragility in those new chains. And so for really founders that are looking to build something, again, that's like real, that's deep, that's sustainable, they will look to build on very solid base chains that aren't going to have problems in those base chains, the outages on Solana or a new chain that maybe will lose its community over time. And so I don't know if it'll be a multi-chain world. I'm very, very open-minded to that. It's very, very possible you'll have different base chains that have different use cases. Certainly that was very much Bitcoin and Ethereum. Bitcoin was really like store of value, money. Ethereum was kind of a computer engine where you could do smart contracts and build all these interesting applications. So that was sort of the original creation of Ethereum. And I can definitely see that as a world we may potentially have. But I am very bullish on a lot of that being able to be built on Bitcoin now.
Now, one more question, Rika, before I hand over again to Demelza. Me being a lawyer, you being based in the US, I mean, the last few months, there were lots of discussion about the SEC acting in the space, which agencies acting in the space, how should US regulation develop? Maybe I would like to see how you would like to see development, where it worries you or where you see the biggest challenges. Being also you being active in this field in Texas and in the US, and maybe some personal experiences, but also your thoughts about it. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I had to deal with US regulators when I was at Goldman Sachs, and I learned firsthand that they're a mess. And I think in general, it's just the lack of regulatory clarity here is crazy. I think Europe and Switzerland do obviously a much better job of that. And they're definitely, I have a company that's in Switzerland and they're working on their MiCA license, and it's just, it's great. It's all clear. This is the steps and it's great. So in the US, I think regulatory clarity, I would love to see. Obviously, Bitcoin has been much less impacted by the recent actions, kind of not really impacted at all, I would say. We weren't necessarily surprised by the recent actions, although I do absolutely have sympathy for companies that were not doing anything that was illegal and all of a sudden they're being prosecuted because there was no regulatory clarity. Like, it's just ridiculous. One thing that does concern me that I would love to see in Bitcoin is an understanding of non-custodial. So in the existing regulatory financial landscape, the whole concept of non-custodial just doesn't exist. So everything is really geared around anyone who's custodying someone else's funds, having this fiduciary responsibility, and that imbalance of power and the risks inherent in the sort of fractional reserve central banking model creates so much risk. There needs to be regulation. And when it's non-custodial, you don't need that at all. If someone is custodying their own funds in their own wallet, that doesn't need to be regulated. But at the moment, it's just this whole new concept that's the rules just don't encapsulate. And this has led to an issue in Bitcoin. So there's been so Lightning facilitates micropayments. So Lightning Network being the second layer on Bitcoin facilitates micropayments. And so apps have basically incorporated that, which is amazing. Anyone can just have their own wallet, and all the app is doing is facilitating one user sending a micropayment to another user. They're never taking custody of users' funds. It's one wallet to another. But the App Store has taken issue with this because it's not explicitly legal, it's not explicitly illegal. And so the App Store, having their monopoly power, and as I'm sure we've all had to deal with making very, very arbitrary decisions, has just said, we're not going to allow this, which that's really frustrating. So that's kind of one really big thing in the Bitcoin world I would love to see regulatory clarity on and regulation around is non-custodial wallets.
Yeah, I think, wasn't there a Bitcoin Lightning payment app that just got taken off of the App Store yesterday or something? Which app was that? I forgot which one it was.
Yeah, there's been two. So Bitcoin is the decentralized transfer of value, and there's a new protocol for the decentralized transfer of information called Nostr, which is being really supported by Jack Dorsey. And that's there was an app built on that called Demelza, which was kind of like a social app incorporating you could zap someone this, instead of just liking on Twitter, you could zap someone like a few sats, and it didn't have a wallet on the app. I would have my like wallet of Satoshi or any other kind of wallet, and then it would just go directly to the wallet of whoever was receiving it, which is amazing. Like, it was great. And the App Store basically was like, this is not allowed. We're giving you 10 days to remove the feature or we delist you. So they removed the feature. And we've also had issues, like one of my company, like Relay, which is based in Switzerland, got delisted from the App Store with no warning. Even though they're completely regulated, they have all the right licenses in Switzerland, they're completely in compliance with European laws. It's a non-custodial solution, and they just got delisted. They managed to like work really closely with the App Store, and it's up and running again, and it's kind of fine. And then there was another non-custodial wallet called Zeus, which got delisted as well.
Wow. Yeah, it really seems like part of either competition or part of Choke Point 2.0, or I'm not exactly sure, but that's really a pity. I'm also invested in Relay. I've known Julian for 5 years, and I joined Relay as an investor in 2020. So I think we're in good company there. I saw the updates when Julian announced that you guys were coming in, and I was so excited because I've always been a fan of both Jeff Booth and Lynn Alden. I've for the last 2 years, I think I've watched every single podcast that Lynn Alden has done, and I read Jeff's book, and yeah, so I think it's huge, and Relay kind of hits on that point that you were discussing earlier about being non-custodial. Like, that's, it is a totally different setup than what we have with other apps in traditional finance, where they are taking custody of the funds and different services we use in traditional finance. So yeah, those are all great points. I just have a couple questions about kind of like the fund and kind of your approach. So is it okay for you to kind of discuss kind of the size of the portfolio and maybe a little bit about the different companies in your portfolio?
Yeah, of course. So our approach as a fund for our first fund is investing in seed and pre-seed. We tend to take larger checks into each company, and then we're very, very supportive, proactive. We spend a lot of time kind of supporting those teams. So we have 5 portfolio companies to date. We'll probably have another 5 to 7 out of our current fund. So we're very actively looking for investments at the moment, and pretty excited about the quality in the last few months. So I'll go through our portfolio. So Relay is one of them, based in Switzerland. So I've learned a lot about Switzerland. I also have some family history in Switzerland and go there every year. So it's really nice to have a company there as well. So Relay is it's a Bitcoin only on-ramp in Europe. So it's really an alternative for people who only want to be Bitcoin focused, to buying on a Coinbase or something like that, where you go on and it's really complicated. There's all of these different currencies. And it's also non-custodial, so direct into non-custodial. And it's really about building a community and giving people this app that they want, that if you want to recommend to your friend to buy Bitcoin, you can recommend Relay. And we see that being as really a key part of the global infrastructure. And in the US, you sort of have a few companies doing something similar. If we think about Swan or River or Unchained, you have kind of a few. And so Relay is really taking that position in Europe. We love the brand that they've built so far. And yeah, Julian, he's great. Another one, so Breeze is one of our portfolio companies. Breeze is effectively, like, we all know Alchemy on Ethereum. They basically abstracted all of the complexity in deploying smart contracts onto ETH, which really facilitated a huge amount of development on ETH. And obviously they were very, very successful as a company. And so we really see Breeze in a way as the Alchemy of Lightning. So they've been a leader in Lightning technology for years, and recently doing this pivot to building an API. So abstracting all of the complexity of building on Lightning, which is very complex, so that anyone can integrate Lightning with, a single line of code onto their app, onto their company, into their website. And it's also non-custodial, which we think, it's discussed is really well positioned for various reasons. And so that's a great company. Fedi is another interesting one, and stop me if I'm going on too much. It's fine. So Fedi is, so we all know, like, we all want to do self-custody, right? Like everyone in Bitcoin is like, you should just self-custody. Everyone should be. The reality is it's very difficult. So self-custody, like first-party custody, is like difficult for even like me, who's, you know, really deep in Bitcoin. Hard for me to recommend to my friends. The onboarding, it's hard. And third-party custody on an exchange is, as we've all learned, like very insecure. And so Fedi is basically bridging that with what's kind of like a second-party custody model. So it's kind of a community. You and your first-party contacts can build a kind of a self-custody with social backup, with social recovery, where you effectively like have an app built to support that. And it's built on top of something which is called a Fedi mint. And a Fedi mint in a way is, so if we think about Bitcoin was built from these generations of like eCash, and eCash was the precursor. And one of the ideas around eCash was a Chalmian mint, which was put forward actually before Bitcoin, but no one ever implemented it. And so Fedi mint is actually an implementation of an eCash model. So each federation under Fedi becomes like its own little bank, and then they're interoperable via Lightning. And what he saw was this really allows for self-custody or second-party custody to scale in a huge way globally. So people in developing countries, instead of, it can help them for each community, every village, to use Bitcoin and custody their Bitcoin. He's working with activists around the world who were really kind of suffering from financial oppression. Their bank accounts were being shut down by the state if they were protesting, you know, things like that. So there was this huge demand from activists to be able to use Bitcoin, but the technology wasn't there. So this is a really interesting idea, and working very closely with the Human Rights Foundation, and where kind of the focus is really on the global South. And that's a really interesting, very interesting team. And they're also abstracting the complexity. So the app is like super simple. You just open it and you can transact. They're like abstracting the complexity of Chalmian mints and all of that, which obviously most people will have no idea about. And then Sonota is totally different again. Sonota, the team came out of the energy industry. So they have decades of experience in energy, and saw this big problem where, you know, you're getting energy constantly, but the payment is, you get a bill at the end of 30 days, which is payable in the next kind of 30 to 60 days. So it creates this huge lag. And what that means is it creates both a cash requirement, like a kind of working capital requirement, and credit risk for energy companies. And what they're providing as a solution, which is basically like using the Lightning Network to settle payments much quicker. So daily, hourly, weekly, you know, whatever the solution wants. Which allows for a huge reduction in credit risk and cash collateral requirement for energy companies, and allows just this kind of seamless flow of payments for energy, really kind of opening up a lot of hopefully innovation in the energy sector, which has been held back by these issues. So yeah, I'll stop there. I know it's a lot.
Oh, Martin, did you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to say something. I forgot. So we switched the microphone. Sonota is also based in Switzerland, right?
Sonota?
Yeah.
No, they're based in the US.
They're based in the US.
We only have one Swiss company so far.
Okay, good.
Hopefully more.
We've also companies.
I think that so you gave a really great explanation of Fedi mint, because I was talking to Matthew Mazinskis of Porkopolis, and he was trying to explain like the economics of how it like of what Fedi mint was doing, but that's a great like background on, you know, the Chom mints and everything like that, in case we wanted to like understand it better. But that's really fascinating. And then also I think one of those people and now how do you spell that? The one that does the Lightning Network payments for the energy companies?
Sonota.
How do you spell that?
Sonota.
Okay, I think I might have met one of them at like Consensus or Bitcoin Miami recently, but yeah, that's a great use of Lightning Network as well. That was so fascinating to hear how that works. But yeah, thanks a lot for letting us have a sneak peek into your portfolio at Ego Death. Maybe Martin, I'm not sure if you have some next questions lined up. Oops, you're muted.
I just say the micro on. I think it's easier because I forget it every time. How it may be also if you act as an investor, I'm just wondering, are you always are you lead investor? Are you co-investing?
So we do like to lead, but we don't need to. So we have led or co-led every deal we've done to date, except for Wolf, which is an incubator we invested in, which didn't have a lead. But we're more than happy to co-invest as long as we like the lead and we trust that they're kind of doing everything properly. So if we kind of have, for a good lead, we'll co-invest.
Perfect. And what's the ticket size you're doing?
So we've invested historically between 1 and 1.5 million, but we can go lower as well. So if it's something in an emerging market where the valuations and capital requirements are just lower, or it's a really early stage, we typically aren't first check-in. So we look for some build, some traction. We were the first check into Sonota, but they'd really kind of done a lot of work while they're in their day jobs to develop that company. So we can go as small as kind of like 250, 500K for the right opportunity as well.
And maybe also another question: how do the startups usually find you, or do you wait to get approached, or are you prospecting yourself?
So we're lucky. I think the brand we've built in the last year, a lot of people building in Bitcoin now do want to work with us. And so they will come to us, whether it's via an introduction or we get a lot of submissions on our website, and we're really, really happy to get people just submitting on our website, and we'll respond to them straight away. We get a lot of meet people we get introduced by founders we've already invested in. So mostly it's coming to us. That said, we're always very proactive and going out to the conferences, speaking, meeting people, kind of constantly talking to everyone we can in the industry and building relationships so that we know every project that's being built and can get the right introductions if we see a project that hasn't approached us yet.
Yeah. Maybe one last question before I hand over to Demelza. I've heard before we had invested in one Swiss company. I mean, then you want to basically you want to really help to resolve issues, problems which are important to the world and also to the southern part of the world you've mentioned before. So my question: do you invest worldwide?
Yeah, we invest worldwide. So far we've invested in Switzerland. We have one portfolio company. So Breeze is actually based in Israel. It's always fun because then you need to engage local counsel and learn a whole new set of laws and sitting on a board of a Swiss company. So it's definitely a little extra layer when we invest globally, but something we're very, very willing to do and recognize Bitcoin as a global solution, that we need to be global as well. And I really like Switzerland as a jurisdiction. I think, to Demelza, your point at the start around it being a really, really important place for crypto, we really, really see that. We think Switzerland historically has always had this focus on self-sovereignty and sovereignty around money. And that's something that's very, very in line with the values of Bitcoin and crypto. And the way that from our, Julian works very closely with the regulators. And so we've heard how constructive regulators are, how proactive they are. So as a jurisdiction, we really like Switzerland, and we're certainly getting feedback from companies we're talking to that are thinking of re-domiciling into Switzerland. So I definitely see, and that was something we really liked about Relay, was that it was based in Switzerland. We see that as definitely kind of an advantage and really, really well positioning them to kind of go into Europe.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, was it Obama that said Bitcoin is like a Swiss bank account in your pocket or something? I think he said something like that a couple of years ago. I mean, looking back on it, I think he meant it in a bad way somehow, but looking back on it, I think he was quite right. Well, okay, so discussing, okay, you were able to invest globally, and you kind of discussed the ticket size. So in terms of like when you're looking at a team, behind a startup or a company that's already gained some traction, what kind of qualities are you looking for? I was listening to a podcast you did a couple of weeks ago or a couple months ago where you mentioned that you are looking for a team kind of versus one person that does everything, because you also had a background in being an entrepreneur. I think that was kind of—
I tried to do that, it doesn't work.
yeah, so maybe if you have a little bit, like, what do you look for in qualities of team members?
Yeah, we're definitely looking for people, like, we always call them like tier one entrepreneurs. We really want to invest in the best. And so we really think, like, are they the best person in the world to tackle this problem and to build what they're trying to build? Or can we support them, bring in advisors? Can we like help them to get there? We really like teams that have some sort of relevant experience in what they're doing. So the Sonota team, they have this amazing energy industry experience. So they're like really the right team to go after that. Or Obi, the CEO of Fetty, he ran the first Bitcoin exchange in the UK. He has so much experience in that. And he has these amazing connections to the global South. And he's hiring this amazing team. And the tech, so it's just like teams that are really, I hate to use, this is a very cliched thing, proof of work. So they kind of have demonstrated in some way that they're capable of doing what they say they're going to do. So typically when we have a team come to us, which maybe has just a pitch deck and doesn't have a huge amount of experience or hasn't tried to build anything yet, we're not really going to invest at that point in time. But if we think it's an interesting idea and team, we might say, keep us updated. We might be interested in your next round once you've proven to us that you can build and get some traction. So we are typically looking for companies that have some sort of build and some sort of traction, whether it's a basic MVP. It doesn't need to be users. The traction could be in kind of feedback they have from potential customers, if it's a SaaS product, or LOIs or pilots in place or something like that. Yeah, that's like the key things. And then we have our whole, diligence memo and, all of the typical things you look for, like the right market size. That's often lacking for a lot of teams. Often people are trying to build a tech that's in search of a problem. So we're really like, okay, what's the problem that this is solving? Have you gone out and spoken to your customers? What's the feedback? Like those sorts of things where I think often entrepreneurs, like to just build a product, but what's the go-to-market? Like, how are you actually going to get it into the hands of your customers? Is it 10x better? Why will people want to use it? Those are the types of questions that we're asking.
So on that point, and before I passed over to Martin, so you're looking at decks for your next round of investments. Are there anything, like, you get together with Lynn and Jeff and your co-founders and you say, I wish that Bitcoin had this company, or I wish that there was this, product being offered, but you're not getting that from any of the decks you've seen so far? Like, is there any product out there that you think Bitcoin really needs?
One thing that I really want to see, that I've seen a couple of people send a deck for, but we haven't invested in, is like a proper NFT platform for Bitcoin. So at the moment, we have ordinals, but you also have Taproot assets coming up on Bitcoin. I love NFTs. Like, I know a lot of Bitcoiners don't. I think they're very cool. I think it makes so much sense that you have digital art and collectibles and so I would really love to see a team that's abstracting all of the complexity of doing an ordinal and making it really, really easy for a B2B, for a SaaS, because so many brands are really exploring NFTs. And I really want to see them on top of Bitcoin because it's the most stable base layer, blah, 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 like I've spoken about, and I love them. So I want to see them in our ecosystem. That's one company. There are a few other kind of areas, but I think that's like the one that personally I really want to see. But we do sit down and like map out the landscape and think, okay, what needs to exist, what hasn't been built yet. But then entrepreneurs come to us and we can never have thought of the things that they come up with.
Good, yeah. This would now maybe for us. I mean, you started your fund a year ago, and of course you're in the industry since much longer. So I'd like to know from you, if you could maybe tell you what's your best and your worst investment experience.
I have to say Swiss documentation was challenging. But we learned some lessons there. We haven't existed long enough to have a bad experience yet. We haven't had a company fail or anything like that, and that will come for sure. We're very realistic about that. I think the best one has been Fedi. Fedi has really just executed on everything they said they would, and they're just doing everything. So in terms of, if we think about all the things that startup needs to do, they've built the team. Someone called them the Avengers of Bitcoin. They're like, who is the absolute best person in the world to fill that role? And then they go out and convince that person to join. And that's like, for an early stage startup, when you have 10 to 15 people, you need every single person in that team to be like the best person for that. So Obi's done a great job of that. They also really thought about UX of the app. They hired, the top UX designer, and they took this really complex protocol and they've just made this app, which is like beautiful and easy and simple, and you just want to use it. They've thought about their go-to-market and building like high level partnerships. So they've just been doing like on every front, everything right. And I think that goes to sort of the experience of the founders, and they had 3 co-founders and each of them was sort of like just the leading people. So I think that's really been a good lesson in like what to look for in teams and for their ability to execute. I would say something that I've personally learned over the past year is, we go through this really deep diligence process. We identify the risks, we identify, the potential challenges with the business. Every business has obviously a huge amount of risks, huge amount of upside. And we're so thoughtful of the diligence process. And then what maybe we didn't have the best process around was we came up with all of these issues with the company, and we didn't have then a process to like work with the company on fixing those right away. And I think that's where we can get better of figuring out, we've identified in our diligence process these problems, not necessarily problems, areas for growth, whatever you call them, and like being very upfront with the founder, like these are the things we want to really work with you on, once the investment is done from day one, so that you have the best opportunity to be successful and get your next round. And often it's easier for people on the outside to see that than it is for someone who's like kind of front and center every day on building a business.
Perfect. Now, one last question from my side before I hand over again to Demelza. And could you tell me what you wish you had known earlier?
I think one thing I didn't necessarily, that's been a big difference is between what I was doing at Goldman, where we would take principal positions, but we would basically hedge them. So you would effectively take P&L, when you executed it, and then you would manage the book and you'd have P&L ups and downs over years, but effectively like you do a transaction and it's done. Whereas in venture, it's like you invest and you don't really know if you're successful for like 7 to 10 years. I mean, we get markups and we can see that this company, we're getting them to Series A quickly, all that stuff. But I would say that's definitely one thing which I didn't fully think through when I dove into venture, is like, it's a very long process to really know if you're successful or not. And so we're just figuring out along the way and taking those wins and celebrating and figuring out how we put in place benchmarking and all of that. But yes, it's definitely different.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's a great insight for kind of everyone out there in this space that's, also making investment decisions. And so yeah, I guess like looking at the past 6 months and then kind of as we kind of move into the next, I guess we're getting close to the next halving, and we're also kind of combating interest rate hikes. And so like, what are you telling your LPs about kind of the, current market conditions? Like, do you think that we're going to be stagnating for another couple months? Or, Bitcoin's had an impressive run since the beginning of the year anyway. So I don't even know if you would consider Bitcoin in a, quote unquote bear market, but yeah, where do you see Bitcoin go in the next couple months?
Yeah, I think as a fund, I would say we try not to necessarily make investment decisions based on a view of where the Bitcoin price will go. We really try and construct a portfolio and invest in companies that we think are building technology that will be useful regardless of where the Bitcoin price is. I mean, obviously, if it goes to zero, like it's not useful, but and that, you know, it's a possibility. So I think there is a lot of dynamics that could potentially really push the price up a lot, and we certainly think that will be the case. But I really don't like to speculate. I don't get too caught up personally in the halvening and whether that drives price. I think it's much more macro. I think there'll be like potentially a next wave of adoption where that comes from. But honestly, I don't have anything really of great insight to say here.
So you're kind of like DCAing in with your equity investments, regardless of the current price of Bitcoin, so to speak. So in 3 to 5 years, wherever Bitcoin's at, you're going to keep building.
Yeah, and we sort of see that our portfolio companies, to an extent, are decorrelated from the Bitcoin price. So it's an investment in the Bitcoin ecosystem that, you know, there will be a degree of correlation with the Bitcoin price, but also a degree uncorrelated. And so as a lot of our investors think about it from a portfolio construction perspective, they don't want to just buy Bitcoin. And so they really see this as an interesting investment to sit alongside their direct Bitcoin exposure.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kind of the differences between buying Bitcoin equity or, I mean, equity of companies building in the Bitcoin space or Bitcoin itself. You also mentioned that a lot of your team or some of your team members join conferences from time to time and learn about who's building on Bitcoin. So do you have any conferences in the next couple months that anyone from Ego Death will be at, or?
Yeah, I'm going to one in Nashville next month, which is I think the Building on Lightning conference held at the Bitcoin Park in Nashville. So that's going to be, I think there's around 500 people kind of building in Lightning that are coming. It should be a really great conference. There's BitBlock Boom in Austin, which I think I will be at. That's more around mining though. And then there's a few conferences in Europe in the fall. I'm not sure if, and there's also TabConf, which is the developer conference, which my business partner Nico will be at in, I think, September. And then there's some really great Bitcoin conferences in Europe. There is one in Switzerland, actually, which I'm not sure if you know about Lugano. It's in Lugano, and it's in October, Plan B. So that's going to be, we're just kind of figuring out if someone from Bitcoin from our firm will be there. And I'll also be personally just in Switzerland, probably the first 2 weeks of September, spending some time with Relay and kind of various other reasons to be in Switzerland.
Yeah, let us know when you're here. It would be great to see you here in Switzerland. Now I have a few questions from the audience, and maybe if there are some new other people listening having questions to you, please put them in the F&A section here. So first question from Elizabeth. She wants to know if you invest in platforms, in Web3 platforms.
What would you define as Web3 platforms? Like platforms on which someone could build a token, or I guess I'm not sure what the definition would be. I guess anything that's like we would invest in anything that's technology in the Bitcoin ecosystem that's building on Bitcoin or Bitcoin adjacent. So on Nostr, for instance, we haven't invested in the Nostr ecosystem. That's this kind of decentralized information protocol, but we definitely would invest if and when we get comfortable with it. So as long as it's not sort of a token, and that's just, we have some concerns around sustainability of kind of token issuance. If it's a technology company building technology in the Bitcoin ecosystem, we would definitely consider it. Mm-hmm. And so there's definitely Web3 applications coming through for sure.
And Christina has a question asking if you know any company that can develop a voting system to use at political elections using blockchain technology.
So actually we have someone who's just implemented in the election in Guatemala that happened over the weekend. Carlos, I'm just pulling up his, let me just see what I can find. But he implemented something where basically the voting was stamped on the Bitcoin blockchain using timestamps. So yes, that's for basically election monitoring to make sure that there's no like fiddling of election results by the government. I'm just trying to find. I can send you some information about that later. I can't find it right now.
Okay, yeah, good. And then we have Francis here, which is stating that you've talked a lot about Bitcoin, and asking if you are investing in startups that develop around tokenization, not just in crypto and not on Lightning.
So we invest in anything in Bitcoin, so it doesn't have to be on Lightning. It could be on the Bitcoin main chain directly. So Relay isn't a Lightning company. And on tokenization, we're not against tokenization. I think we just have a lot of the same concerns, honestly, that the SEC has, that they're basically unregistered securities. There's a huge one way of information, not the right disclosures, not the right incentives. So in general, we're very, if we were to think about token issuances on Bitcoin, which we definitely see happening potentially in the future, but we really would hold them up to a very high bar in terms of disclosure standards, regulation. We don't know what that framework will look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I mean, from my side, these are basically the questions. I think it's very, very interesting what we have learned from you, Andi. It's really great to have you here. I think you have a very clear thesis and a very also, well-developed approach. And I think we learned a lot from you, and it would be great to stay in touch. And hopefully we see you when you come this late summer to Switzerland. And maybe I would like to hand over to Demelza for the closing words. Thank you very much.
Definitely.
And all the very best.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Andi. And yeah, so Crypto Valley Association, we do an annual conference as well. We just did it about a month ago. So maybe next summer, we could be able to be honored enough to welcome you or somebody from Ego Death, and get the viewpoint on Bitcoin. I can only think of like I can't count the fingers on my hand of Bitcoin only VCs, but I think it makes total sense, because that is the main crypto. I mean, it's the number one cryptocurrency, and it's the one that has the best chance of giving people financial freedom and all sorts of other freedoms, like with Nostra, with information freedom and everything. So very, very exciting to hear from you, Andi, today. If people wanted to follow you, follow you on Twitter or get in touch with you, what would be the best place for them to, reach out?
Yeah, I'm just dropping my email. I'm not huge on Twitter. I generally retweet things mostly from our portfolio companies. I do occasionally post something or write an article. I wrote a big article about Nostr, but you can follow me on Twitter at one Andi Pitt, so the number 1 and then Andi Pitt. I just dropped it in. And you can also email me, andi@egodeath.capital. Dropping it in the chat. More than happy to kind of hear from anyone. And if you forget all of that we have a form submission on our website, which we respond to kind of almost every submission that comes through. So thank you so much for hosting me. It's been great, and I hopefully would love to meet you when I'm in Switzerland later in the summer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andi. Thank you, Demelza. It was great to chat with you, and all the very best, and have a wonderful summer.
Thanks so much. You too.
Yeah. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.